I've stated before in the past that I'm not a massive Metal Gear Solid fan, and that still holds true as of the recording of this video. However, there is a Metal Gear game that I enjoy. A little game that has you thinking about ideologies and the war economy, child soldiers and technological advancements in warfare like artificial intelligence and the impact that that can have. And memes.
Memes. The DNA of the soul.
In what other Metal Gear game can I be debating ideologies with someone 1 second and then cutting them into 1,000 pieces a few minutes later? Today, we're talking about Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. So first off, let's talk about the combat, as it's what we'll be doing for the majority of the game. While this game does hail from such titles as Devil May Cry, it's nowhere near as complex. You have two attack buttons, square for light attacks and triangle for heavy attacks. Press these buttons in any combination to do cool combos, and one thing I need to praise is that the animations all flow into each other perfectly, making you feel really cool and as if you're pulling off the most stylish moves known to mankind, when really all you're doing is pressing two buttons. You can also hold R2 and you will ninja run. This allows you to run circles around your enemies while slicing them to pieces, which is really helpful against certain ones with stunlock attacks. There is also a blade mode if you hold L2, which allows you to stand still and slice up your enemies into small pieces, turning one man into 100 men. There is also a version of this called Zandatsu, which allows you to target a specific area, and if you slice it, you can press circle to rip out the enemy's spine, which will refill your health and your Zandatsu meter, allowing you to do it again, and again, and again, and no matter how many times I see these animations, I love them. That's how you deal damage, but what if you're taking it? Well, you can run away to dodge, but that's not much fun. Your other option is to parry. How do you parry? You attack while pushing the analog stick towards the enemy attacking you. Yep, you heard me right. You attack to parry. This does occasionally lead to frustration when you're mid-attack and an enemy attacks and the game registers your attempt to parry as another attack, but on the whole it's a good system. Keeping on the combat, there are a few enemies who do cause a massive problem, and that's because of their stun mechanics, namely the dwarf geckos and the mastiffs. Both of these have a move that will stun you, and many bosses have this as well, that you have to wiggle the stick back and forth in order to regain control. This is a frustrating method since it doesn't mesh well with the rest of the button combinations in the game. If it was mash or button, I think it would blend in a lot better. I know that in order to wiggle fast enough, I have to hold my controller in a different way that I do while fighting normally. Level design is another topic to talk about, and it's very linear, which isn't actually bad for this kind of game. People tend to talk about linear design as if it's this awful thing. You imagine the Call of Duty style where they give you a waypoint for everything you need to do, and you have to do it in a very specific place with no deviation from exactly how the game designers intended it to be done. The levels themselves are linear. However, your choices within them are not. There are encounters you can stealth your way around, or you can go into every fight sword drawn ready to cut the enemies up into pieces, or you can mix these strategies. Use stealth to thin out the stronger opponents before slicing and dicing the weaker ones. It's entirely up to you, and that's why the levels being linear is not a bad thing. It also keeps the lightning fast pace going, especially towards the end. The game ramps up a lot. There are 8 chapters in the whole game, starting at 0 and ending at 7, and chapter 4, 5, 6 and 7 have near enough back-to-back boss fights, with chapter 5 in particular just being a boss fight, but we'll come back to those later. Keeping on the pace, there is one thing that can absolutely destroy it. And that's the numerous codec calls and lengthy cutscenes, both of which are holdovers from the series that this game comes from, and its original vision. The game started off as a Kojima Productions title. Kojima wanted to give the younger members of his team a game to make in order to prepare them for working on Metal Gear Solid 5. The game was stuck in development hell for a long time. Production started not too long after the release of MGS4, which came out in 2008, and the game still wasn't anything solid by 2010. This is where the action game Legends Platinum Games come in. They took the concepts that the Kojima Productions team had come up with and combined it with their expertise after making Bayonetta and being founded by Devil May Cry legend Hideki Kamiya. They saved the title from development hell and gave us the incredible game that was released in 2013, but it didn't make it out unscathed. The way this comes across in the final game is a lot of the themes and topics that are covered, but also the amount of codec calls, and there are tons of these after most fights in the game that stop the pace dead in its tracks. You can't do anything while these codec calls play out. You just have to stand there and listen to these idiots blabber on about ideologies or give you exposition. These are skippable, and yeah, that's fine, but on the first time round, you want to understand the story. So you watch every cutscene and listen to every call, and the pacing is hurt because of it. It would even be better if you could run around or fight common enemies while these calls are going on, but you can't. You just have to stand there or slowly walk and then stand when the game blocks further progression until the call's done. I really like the aesthetic of this game. The HUD looks awesome with the holographic look and styles itself after MGS4. The radar makes sure that you never get lost, but I found myself not using it a whole lot, which really does show you how well the game guides players through the levels. However, one thing that the HUD brings is a really clunky way to change main weapon or sub-weapons. You have to fully pause the action and scroll through the classic Metal Gear menu, and in a high-octane action game like this, feels more like an interruption than it did in the main series. On that note, I never actually used the extra weapons during the main campaign. Each one you get is related to one of the boss fights. Mistral's Pole, Monsoon's Sigh, and Sundowner's Pincer Swords. When these are equipped, they take up your heavy attacks, meaning that you lose some of your normal moveset, but let's talk about these amazing weapons. Mistral's Pole is my favourite of these. It swings wide and hits hard. It's great for crowd control and often wipes the floor with entire groups of even fairly tough foes. Monsoon's Sigh stuns enemies, giving the player a great opportunity to get a lot of damage in. This again just wipes the floor with enemies, but more on a one-on-one basis this time. The final boss weapon is Sundowner's Pincer Swords. This is probably the least useful because it is big and heavy and is very slow to swing in comparison to any of the other weapons at Raiden's disposal. It does hit really hard as a consequence of this, but not worth the risk of getting hit in my opinion. The story in this game is absolutely batshit insane, and honestly a lot of the things it talks about are way above my head in terms of philosophies, ideologies and ideas, but I can say that I enjoyed it. Characters are very entertaining to watch, and Raiden's own personal tale about coming to terms with why he fights is a decent enough arc to follow and structure the plot around. The main thing that pushes the story forwards is the boss fights, so let's move on to those, starting with the first boss in the first level. Metal Gear Ray is used to set the tone of the game. This is a massive boss fight for Metal Gear Solid, and Raiden manages to throw it and cut it in half within the first 10 minutes of gameplay. The fight itself isn't as great as the spectacle. Run towards it, slash at the leg until you enter blade mode and cut a section before repeating. Luckily it comes back for a better fight with a more varied moveset before ramping up the spectacle even more, and you run down the side of a building before slicing the entire thing open. Metal Gear Ray also has one of my favourite songs in the whole game, Rules of Nature. I don't know how to describe this song, but the instrumental is amazing and the lyrics are even better. Each boss has a song that links to their fight, and when the tension is at its highest, the song will include the lyrics. The next boss is Blade Wolf, who will become an ally after this fight. If you haven't learned how to parry by now, you will lose. Blade Wolf can swing wide and leaps around the arena. At a few points he calls in backup, which allows the player to regain any health they may have lost in the main fight. This is a good starter fight, and it offers more challenge than the Metal Gear, and teaches a useful mechanic for every fight afterwards. And with that, we move on to Mistral. This fight is one of my favourites. We start off on a round platform and have to fend off the dwarf geckos while parrying and attacking Mistral. Her pole arm has a very long reach, while Raiden Sword has a comparatively shorter one. After a while of this, the fight transfers to a pipe where we fight off more dwarf geckos, and Mistral will eventually come down to deal some damage of her own. The final section takes place in a burning factory and has us doing the same as before. At the end of the fight, we freeze Mistral and slice her up into a million pieces. This is a motif that continues through every boss in the game, and it's a very satisfying way to end the fight. Her song is also incredibly catchy, with a more pop rock sound when compared to Metal Gear Ray's harder sound. The next fight we get isn't for a while, and it's against Monsoon. Right off the bat, his song is another favourite of mine. The guitar here is amazing, and it perfectly matches the frantic nature of the fight itself. Monsoon has a few phases that he goes through. There's his normal form, where you can attack him like any other boss. A phase where he throws down smoke and jumps at you, with you needing to parry his attacks. Another phase where he's invincible due to being able to separate parts of his body as you try to slice him, which you need to just parry and wait him out until he's able to be hit again. And the final phase he has is one where you use blade mode to slice up objects he throws at you. He switches through these phases at a rapid rate, and it gives the fight a great unpredictable energy. Sundowner is the next fight, and it's fine. Not really much of a step up from any of the previous in terms of difficulty, but he has a shield that he can put up and you can slice through in blade mode. I never actually managed to slice through his shield fully due to the inaccuracy of using the buttons in blade mode rather than the stick. The ending is pretty cool, with you riding a drone through the building, slicing the roof open before slicing him. His song is also one of the least special for me. It's great along with the rest, but it really doesn't stand out to me in the same way that Stains of Time or Rules of Nature do. The next boss, however, has no such problem. Jetstream Sam actually has two fights, both of which are a great contrast to each other. His first fight happens in the prologue, and you're supposed to lose. The game doesn't even try to fool you, as Sam has no health bar in this fight, but you do, hinting at his unbeatable nature. His second fight, though, is a true duel with another swordsman, with some of the hardest combos to parry, and his moves deal an insane amount of damage. He can parry you and dodge your moves in much the same way that you've been doing to all other enemies in the game. He has a phase where you knock the sword from his hand and he uses melee attacks on you while repeatedly dodging. You need to wait this out and parry him enough before he picks up the sword again and the battle continues. This is honestly my favourite fight in the game, and his song is incredible. It's the one I used in the intro for this video. There's a boss fight against another Metal Gear. Honestly, this fight is barely even worth mentioning, as it's pretty weak. The one after this, though, is the most infamous and probably the most memed on in the whole game. Senator Armstrong.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
This is a really long, multi-stage fight that does not disappoint. Phase 1, you fight him on top of the defeated Metal Gear you just took down. He has charging moves and will kick and punch you, using his nanomachines to pack a really mean punch. After beating this, he snaps your sword in half, leaving you to fight him with your fists. This is where the infamous QTE comes from, of Raiden punching him really fast. Phase 3, you're given Sam's sword, and now he will punch the ground to send fire your way. You need to avoid this before slicing him with the sword. This phase of the fight goes on for a long time, since he has 200% health. He will throw things at you to slice before you continue with the usual dodge, fire and slash. This more or less goes on until the end of the fight, with a few interesting QTEs to spice it up a little. This fight is not only a test of everything you've done throughout, but also a test of resilience, since it does last a very long time, and there's some fairly lengthy cutscenes between parts of the fight. It's an amazing finale to the game. Another small complaint I have is with the credits. Nothing actually wrong with them themselves, just the fact that you can't skip them. I understand wanting to make the audience know who worked on the game, but from the player's perspective, it should be a choice whether or not they watch them, and Metal Gear Rising doesn't give you a choice at all. This became an even bigger annoyance when I finished the main story and the 2 DLC all in the same night, and had to watch the credits 3 times. Speaking of DLC, there are 2 story expansions of Metal Gear Rising that were released shortly after the main game. One where we play as Blade Wolf before his fight with Raiden, and another in which we play as Sam before any of the events of the main campaign. Starting with Blade Wolf, he can use more or less every move he had in the boss fight with him, including his own version of Blade Mode that uses his tail instead of a sword. You fight through many of the same enemies you fight in the main campaign, but there's also some forced platforming. This is something that really bugs the shit out of me. Games not built for something feel the need to include it. For this game, it's platforming. You're hardly playing as Mario Mr. Jumpman Mario. You are playing as a big metal dog with a chainsaw tail. Why is there platforming? This took me longer than anything else in the entire game, by the way. It's fucking stupid, and why was it even in here? Doesn't change a single thing either. You could have just had a normal stealth or fight sequence here. The DLC is also pretty tough. You very rarely have healing items at your disposal up until the very end. The DLC also makes me feel things. The story of this DLC is that Blade Wolf is trying to break free of Mistral's control, and it helps to humanise him a little more, as weird as that sounds for a robot. The levels are reused from the main story, which is true for both DLC to be honest. The final boss is a pretty solid fight. Nothing in comparison to the main campaign, but still a good fight that gave me a good challenge. The second DLC is Jetstream Sam, and I love it. He feels like the Virgil of Metal Gear Rising. He's an absolute powerhouse and is packing 7 dump trucks. His DLC is a lot more fun since it doesn't include any platforming and is just everything you love about the main game. Codec calls are cut down significantly and cutscenes are to the point. Unfortunately, both boss fights are reused, so not much I can really talk about there. You fight Metal Gear Ray and a cut down version of the Senator Armstrong fight. Not much to say really, as I've spoken about these fights already. Again, levels from the main story are reused here, namely the sewer and the office building where we fought Sundowner, which that arena is now where Armstrong is. We also fight Blade Wolf in the sewers because apparently the fight was just so fucking good that we had to do it again. The story of this DLC shows us how Sam got involved in the whole scheme, with Armstrong recruiting him at the end after Sam makes this fucking face. I swear, this face absolutely floored me for several minutes the first time I saw it, and even now as I'm recording this, like, I'm laughing while thinking about it. And that's really all I have to say about Metal Gear Rising. It's a solid action game with an amazing soundtrack and some of the best boss fights I've ever played. While I do think it takes some missteps, like the numerous lengthy codec calls and an awful lot of talking for a fast-paced title, it still entertains me enough that I would happily replay it several times over. I've been Roscoe M, and I'll see you all next time. Bye. Hi everyone, welcome to the end card ramble part of the video that you should be well used to by now. It's currently 25 to 1 in the morning, and I've just finished editing this, and it is a really good video. I'm really happy with it. You know, it's not as long as some of the ones I've been doing recently, but I feel like I went into a good amount of depth, you know, with everything that I went into. I hope you enjoyed the music throughout the video, because I fucking loved the Metal Gear Rising soundtrack. Particularly Sam's song, as it got the most plays. It got like 3 plays, I think. Because it was during the intro, his boss fight, and then his DLC. Honestly, it's one of my favourite pieces. You should go and listen to it. Because it's amazing, and honestly, this whole game is great. You know, I hope the title isn't too, like, misleading or anything, because I don't necessarily base my whole video around the game being a conflict in style, but I hope that it showed what the conflict of style was. You know, that on one hand it wants to be a fast-paced action, like, you know, kind of Bayonetta-style Platinum game, and on the other hand it wants to be a Metal Gear game, and I hope that, you know, I was able to illustrate that the two of those coming together, while it is great and the final game is a fantastic piece of media, it's not perfect, because I believe that, like, nothing, like, no game will ever be perfect, and, you know, some of them will be called perfect or whatever, but yeah, like I say at the end of the video there, I don't think the game is, while I don't think the game is perfect, it is certainly entertaining enough, and I do recommend that you play through it. Because it's awesome, and, you know, you experience Metal Gear Rising. I didn't go much into plot this time, but that's just because I didn't feel that going into the plot was that important for the video. You know, apart from mentioning the fact that the cutscenes can be quite lengthy at times, which they're nowhere near the main series, but they're still fairly long for an action game. But in fairness, also, DMC3 had some cutscenes that went on quite long. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this. Next video is the 500th. And as of recording this video, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing for it. So I guess you and I will find out together what I end up doing for 500 videos. Insane to think about, really, that there's 500 public YouTube videos on this channel nearly. But that's all for the next one. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this one. I'm gonna go get some sleep. Bye!